Well, welcome everyone. We're going to be talking about the end of summer here and the vegetables that you would plant at the end of summer. So, just because you're gardening from the spring may have be concluding, it doesn't mean that you have to necessarily stop gardening. There's plenty of vegetables that can be planted in the fall and can be planted quite successfully, and maybe even a better crop than you would have if you would have planted those in the springtime. So, a special thanks out to some of the other horticulture educators that helped with this presentation. Jennifer Fishburne, Kelly Alsop, and Nancy Creeth all contributed to this presentation that Bruce Black was going to present, but unfortunately he was unable to make it. So, we will continue on in this subject matter. So, we're going to be going over some of the benefits of planting fall veggies, how to plant them, some of their specifics on what to do and how to get it accomplished in planting a fall garden. Here we see in the picture quite a few vegetables, some beets, kohlrabi, and these are generally a good crop for the fall. So it may take less time for you to cultivate the garden because you may have already cultivated for the spring. The soil's already worked up. Probably less watering needs and less insect pressures because uh, you may have already handled and got a handle on your insect pressure that may have been there. Fall generally can provide a better flavor for some of these vegetables. We do tend to get cooler nights, and that can change the aspect of the starches changing into sugar. And generally, you do find that light frost can help release some of those sugars from those plants, and you may find that they do get sweeter. So, when you're planting for the fall, you don't want to go overboard, and you may also consider in planting a fall garden that the marketplace for seeds can somewhat dwindle. So it's good to maybe have it planned ahead of time that you're going to be doing fall gardening and pick up some extra seeds in the springtime whenever they're more readily available. But there's plenty of online sources that you can order seeds from and have that availability of planting in the fall. Here we have a few different instances of planters. You might utilize a hanging basket or a container. Lettuces can grow well in that or in these earth boxes or window style kind of planters. A lot of these have a reservoir in the bottom that can maintain some of that moisture more evenly, and that's a challenge that we have with containerized vegetable gardening is the irrigation. So you may have to keep a better attention to those vegetables in those containers because they can tend to dry out. But you want to grow what you like to eat. And as we see in lettuces, there's many different kinds of lettuce. And so you can plant the particular variety that you would like and plant what you're going to eat. And so that is a good aspect to consider, and there's many different kinds that can be grown, but also think of the heat tolerance of those particular varieties. And there are even Asian greens that can be planted and do well in the season. So look for your different varieties, research those, and make your best selection for the climate that you're in. And you'll also have a variation of availability on your growing season that we have left in the fall based on your location in the state. And so, what we're looking at as far as location in the state is the potential for a fall freeze. And you can see in the map that the potential generally happens in October, but it can span into November depending on your location. And so this is going to affect which vegetables are going to survive. Some are frost tolerant vegetables and they can survive a frost, but you may have ones that are more of your warm loving plants that would not survive. And here we see for the southern portion of Illinois those same scenarios of a fall freeze and its occurrence. So it's good to investigate in gardening when your uh, particular plant dates are based on your zone. And for fall gardens, you can start as early as June 1st, and typically uh, into July and August for whenever you're going to be planting these. But some of these can be planted in succession. So you may have multiple planting dates for the particular crop. And you may also be able to extend your season by using some season extension techniques. So when do you plant? It depends on the particular crop. Your timing is going to be everything. So you're going to look at when your harvest date is and work backwards from that to figure out when you're going to plant. So you're going to schedule based on that harvest, and you're going to take into consideration the hardiness of the plant and how many days to maturity that you'll find on the seed packet. And as I said, work backwards to find that particular date that you can start to plant that particular vegetable. These particular dates that we find for planting, we can find planting dates both online, and there's a nice reference of vegetable gardening in the Midwest is a University of Illinois Extension publication, and it has all the different dates for both summer and fall gardens listed. So in planting vegetables, we'll have a little bit of review of some of the preparation that is needed and necessary for planting your vegetables. So you want to loosen the soil and have that soil not be compacted as best as possible. This is really well accomplished in a raised bed situation for a loose soil. You can add compost or organic matter to the soil, whether it be field or a raised bed situation. This scenario of fertilizer is an important one. You want to make sure that you have adequate nutrients. And a soil test can help you to determine what nutrients you already have in the soil. You don't want to till if it's too wet, and that can be detrimental for the compaction, but you also don't want to overwork the soil and damage that structure that you've worked so hard to build. Now, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium are the three letters that are represented here. And so they have an aspect of how the plants grow and develop. And so we see here the leaf growth and the green color. That's your nitrogen that's involved with that. The fruiting and root growth is from your phosphorus, and your root development or disease resistance can be from the potassium. So you don't want to apply too much nitrogen to your crop because then you may get just vegetative growth and not the fruit that you desire of your vegetables. In purchasing seed, you should usually buy fresh seed because you'll have the best success of germination. You want to order in advance. As I said, some of the supplies may dwindle in the fall, so being prepared is always a good thing. Your seed, if harvested, if you're a seed saver, make sure that you have a clean, viable seed that's disease free. And purchasing disease free seeds is a benefit, and there often is a disease resistance labeling on your seed packet. And so the more diseases that it's resistant to, probably the better and easier growing season that you'll have. And of course, whenever you're saving seeds, it's best to store those in a cool, dry place so they maintain the longest survival rate for your germination when you plant those. Here we can see the average life of seeds for many of our crops. Usually your smaller seeds only last for a year. Other seeds can last for up to 4 or 5 years, depending on the particular crop that's planted. We usually have some different methods of planting, some efforts of direct seeding. It's just not worth the effort of transplanting these particular vegetables. And we see your leaf lettuce and kale and spinach. Usually these have smaller seeds, and it's much easier to thin these crops and to plant those directly into the garden. There are some that are worth the effort of transplanting, and so we have broccoli and collards and cauliflower. A lot of these cool season crops, we can take the advantage of an indoor environment that is more conducive to keeping them from experiencing too much heat, and then extend the growing season and be able to plant those in the fall and have better success. For planting seeds, typically it's based on the size of the seed. So planting your seeds twice as deep as the size of the seed. And here we see a representation of that in the illustration of a bean, a radish, and a lettuce seed. The lettuce seed being the smallest, so closer to the surface of the soil. It's noted as being a traumatic thing for gardeners to thin their plants. We sometimes think of, you know, well, we're killing this plant and I don't want to do that, but it is a necessary thing to give the plant that is going to survive the most nutrients and the best chance of survival and growth. So, in looking at a cell pack or you're planting for the cell pack, you're going to want one seedling per hole and then follow your space recommendations whenever you're planting those into the garden. You want to make sure that you leave enough space for airflow in the garden to where you have adequate drying of the leaves, and that can help prevent some disease. When you cut off the seedling, you want to handle them by the leaf and not the stem, so that way you can not damage the root system of the plant whenever you're removing that from the seedling tray. Setting your transplants. Here we have some of the commonly transplanted crops from the Solanaceae crops, your tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, and the cruciferous crops, broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower. So setting these in the garden, you're going to want to harden them off to where they're better adjusted from the indoor environment to the outdoor environment. They wouldn't have had the wind, and sometimes you may add a bit of protection to these after you have planted them to prevent wind damage or possibly for insect damage. So for your tomato crops, peppers, eggplant, probably providing some barrier of the wind would be a benefit. And for things like cabbage and cauliflower, putting a row cover over those can help prevent insects from being a detriment to those. So when we plant things in succession, we can plant a continual harvest of crop, and so you can schedule that throughout your growing season. And so we see here some lettuces and possibly radishes. So in a week's time or 14-day interval, we can continually harvest these types of vegetables. And so replanting the onion sets every 2 weeks, that gives us a time to where we can harvest these on a continual basis. And we see kind of a schedule here for your particular vegetables and succession planting represented both in the spring planting and in the fall. And so you see the July August time frame is an important time frame for planting your fall vegetables. And we'll talk about some characteristics of your vegetable selection. So hardy vegetables, they can be planted 4 to 6 weeks before the frost-free date. They're going to be the most hardy, and they're not going to be uh, killed by that first frost that we may have. Half hardy or frost tolerant vegetables. They can be planted 2 to 3 weeks before the frost-free date. And so we look at that not only in the springtime, but we look at that in the fall for the hardiness of the vegetable. So here are some of the hardy vegetables. So in late August to early September, kale, kohlrabi, onion, spinach, turnips, Brussels sprouts, garlic. Half hardy, quite a few varieties of vegetables. And so thinking about your crops and planting, you may also think about crop rotation and how to better utilize the space that you have and to keep it disease free if you're planting uh, continually into the fall. So we can sow your seeds for the different vegetables, and depending on the days to maturity, we have some radishes that mature early, or we may have some that are heat tolerant. We can also think about the amount of space that the foliage is going to prevent weeds from growing, and we should have a better chance of success for weed competition not being that great in the fall. So for your root crops, you're going to want a well-drained soil that will help to prevent disease and problems that would occur. You'll want plenty of organic matter, a loose soil. You're going to prepare and plant those in a row or a trench based on the seed packet recommendations for spacing, and then thin those to the point where you have an adequate crop. Whenever it comes to harvesting, you can pull those plants from the ground and then trim the tops if it's necessary. In some cultures, they do eat the tops of beets, and you can eat sprouts that were thinned out uh, prematurely to whenever you harvest the mature fruit or vegetable. So here we see beets and the growing time frame for the maturity date is 50 to 70 days. You'll harvest these whenever they get to an inch and a half to 2 inch diameter. Again, the tops are edible, and so there's different methods of planting the beet seeds. You can also have some seeds that are pelletized to where it makes it a little easier to handle, but soaking those seeds is maybe something that could assist you in your growing efforts. Carrots, you can thin those seedlings and eat the greens. Baby carrots, you're going to harvest those in earlier in the season, so from 50 to 60 days, and then if you want a mature carrot, 60 to 80 days after seeding. You can be left in the ground until frost. With carrots, it's important for your compaction of soil. If these are a root crop, and so if they hit a hard place in the soil, they won't be as a beautiful carrot as you see in these photos. They'll tend to branch out and spread those roots. The radish, a real quick season crop, some about 28 days after seeding. You can harvest them after they get to be an inch in diameter. Uh, the winter radish may grow a little bit slower, but usually you have a better flavor in the fall. Your cold crops that are the heading vegetables. So we have broccoli. You're going to need to adequately water so you have good head development. The cabbage, early planting misses most of the cabbage worms. Uh, Again, you could use a row cover to help prevent some of those caterpillar moth injuries. And then again, you're going to need to water, especially in the late summer when maybe an issue for having dry conditions. These particular crops are going to be more sensitive to drought conditions, and so that's with any of these crops, you're going to need to keep that in mind whenever you're taking care of your crop. The non-heading, these do not form heads. We have collards, kale, and kohlrabi. And depending on the cultivar, you can have, uh, various kinds of kale. It is very cold hardy. You may see some ornamental varieties as well, different colors that we see in the autumn. And kohlrabi was one that I was introduced at a younger age. It is the edible portion that's that rounded and large stem. And the best flavor is whenever it's young because it can get woody. So for your planting, you're going to plant in April, in July, and August for your fall crop. Typically, these are going to be direct seeded because they are difficult to transfer. But if you do transfer, it may establish and mature earlier than what you would if it's direct seeded. So utilizing some seeding methods of some have used the biodegradable pots, and that can be a technique to avoid disrupting the root system. So harvest these crops at the right time based on their edibility. We have broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower. Once the head forms, it can be harvested. With some particular cold crops, once you harvest the main head, secondary heads can be obtained. And the kale and collards, you harvest the outer mature leaves. And so you can see in the photograph in the lower portion some previously harvested mature leaves. Broccoli is going to take from 50 to 65 days for maturity. Using a row cover can help prevent those pests. Use transplants is probably going to help you succeed. And all of these vegetables should be planted in full sun. Cabbage, there's many different kinds of cabbage, whether it be green, red, or purple. And if you cut these heads, they will regrow sprouts. Typically, the maturity time is 60 to 90 days. Turnip and rutabaga, again, another short crop. It 28 days for the turnip greens. The turnip's going to take a little bit more time to develop and to, but depending on your preferences, you can harvest these and trim the leaves off the upper portion and have a nice turnip. Kohlrabi, an interesting kind of vegetable. They can be either green or purple. And so most of these are harvested when they're tender, about 2 to 3 inches in diameter. If they get any larger, they do tend to get woody. Leafy greens, good in season extension kind of scenario. Here we see them undercover in the portion of the photo in the upper right, but they can have differences in taste and appearance. The oak leaf and deer leaf or deer tongue lettuces are nice for warm weather, but you definitely want to look at your heat tolerance whenever it comes to planting your lettuce and leafy greens. Some other leafy greens are our herbs. We have direct seeding of arugula in September. It can grow pretty easily. Cilantro, do direct seed in early to mid August. This particular herb, the seeds are going to form the coriander that we like as an herb. And then the parsley is, you can set your transplants as a biennial. So planting your leafy greens, again, succession planting, 2 to 3 week intervals. You can direct seed these in early September and keep the harvest going all fall long. For your leafy greens, most are fast maturing, and so you harvest those when they're young and tender. You can cut the whole plant or harvest the individual leaves. And the earlier the harvest is, that it's considered a baby lettuce or baby crop that you're harvesting. Swiss chard can add some color to your landscape. This is a edible plant that can be incorporated into an edible landscape. One of the most popular varieties are bright lights. 28 days for the baby leaves and 55 days for the full maturity of the Swiss chard. Collards, they can taste better after a few frosts. Ornamental kales can be included in this group. They will need ample soil moisture, more tolerant to the cold weather than the other cold crops. Kale, a very healthy, interesting plant. They do have a lot of different textures, and so the flavor does improve after a frost. But and you can harvest it in your basis of maturity time. 12 inches apart is a typical spacing. Lettuce can mature from seed 45 to 60 days. Many different kinds and varieties that are available. Again, look at your heat tolerance whenever you're making your selections. Mustards, you can sow those seeds and thin them to 5 inches apart. Pick the leaves when they're young and tender. Some of the mustards can be affected on their amount of spice by the climate or the amount of irrigation that they have experienced. So keep that in mind when you're planting your mustards. Spinach germinates best in the cool soil and can be harvested at early maturity at 27 days. But it is extremely heat sensitive and it can rapidly bolt. So be cautious of that. So in general, prepare the soil well, amend as needed. Be sure to utilize a soil test to know what your nutrients are. Look at that seed packet, choose those disease resistant cultivars. Make sure that if you're growing the seeds from a crop you previously produced, that you stored those properly. Plant and harvest at the proper time. Use good sanitation in the garden. If you're going to be discarding a particular vegetable, you want to pick both the good and the bad and get that out of the garden area. Provide the proper care, definitely irrigation whenever planting a fall garden. You're going to want to water deeply but less frequently. Drip irrigation is a nice feature that you could utilize. Providing a mulch, even in the fall, does eliminate some of the weed problems that you might have. Again, good sanitation and enjoy growing a fall garden. So with that, we do have some resources for planting, and here are some websites to get information about some of the various vegetables you can plant. Source for those Illinois frost dates and the growing season can be found at this website. Our past webinar recordings are found at the YouTube channel here for the University of Illinois Extension Horticulture team, and those are available on an ongoing basis. If you have questions and haven't put them into the chat, you can put those into the chat, and here is a QR code so you can take a short survey, and you can also find that survey at go.illinois.edu/fall veggies. With that, I did cover for Bruce Black, and I'm sure that if you had additional questions, you can contact Bruce or myself.